Hi, my name's Odalyn, and 5 days before our wedding, while I was picking out centerpieces with my mother, he was signing away the deed to my childhood home, behind my back, to fund a new life, with her. They thought I'd be too distracted, too loyal, too blind. But I didn't break. I walked into that courtroom, and didn't sit in the gallery. I took the judge's bench. Before we begin, what time are you listening to this, and where from? Drop a comment. We're about to unravel every lie they built their future on. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, the same way it had decades ago, when I used to trail behind my mother as she wiped down the banister in her worn apron. This house, it wasn't just a place. It was the last real thing left of them. After the wedding, I'd planned to make it ours. A soft reboot of my family's story. Something cleaner, warmer. Something that didn't hurt to remember. I was down to my final box. Just a few old sweaters and a dusty stack of magazines from the hall closet. I'd made space in the primary bedroom closet for Nathan's suits the week before, thinking he might finally bring the rest of his things from his apartment. We'd talked about merging our lives. His toothbrush was already next to mine, his cologne bottle left uncapped on the bathroom sink. It felt real, solid. But when I walked into the bedroom that afternoon, dragging the cardboard box under one arm, I stopped cold. The closet doors were ajar, and empty. Not just a little shuffled or light. Empty. Gone were his charcoal suits, the cufflinks I gave him for his birthday, the brown leather loafers he swore were too stiff but wore anyway. Even the cedar blocks he insisted on keeping tucked into his sleeves, gone. I stepped back, unsure if I was misremembering. My eyes moved to the dresser. Top drawer. Empty. Second drawer. The socks I'd folded for him were gone. The leather-bound notebook he scribbled in every night, not there. My throat tightened. I bent down and yanked open the bottom drawer. The photo, one of us and my parents on their last Thanksgiving before the accident, used to sit beneath his boxers. I'd tucked it there months ago when I noticed it sliding out of a drawer. It was gone, too. I stood there, the air thick and unmoving, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The locked drawer. My fingers reached it before my brain did. I'd kept the house deed there since settlement. It was symbolic more than anything. I didn't want it floating around, especially with the renovations going on. The key still stuck out slightly from the brass lock. I turned it. The drawer clicked. Empty. Except for one thing. A yellow post-it, perfectly centered, written in Nathan's handwriting. Don't worry, I've secured everything. I held it between my fingers like it might dissolve. My heartbeat wasn't racing. It was slow, heavy. A drumbeat underwater. My knees buckled, but I didn't fall. I just sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the paper, willing it to make sense. That evening, he came home like nothing was off, loosened his tie, asked what we had for dinner. I stood by the kitchen island. Where's your stuff? He looked up, confused for half a second. I moved some of it, just streamlining. Streamlining? He smiled, walked over, kissed my forehead like I was 5. Just getting us legally prepped. Surprise. You'll see. Did you take the deed? He tilted his head. Babe, don't worry, I'm on top of it. This is what you wanted, right? Merged lives. No more separate documents, no stress. His phone buzzed. He glanced down. Gotta run. Meeting. He was gone before I could say another word. I didn't eat that night. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I made coffee out of habit but let it go cold on the counter. I didn't have an appetite for anything but answers. That's when my phone rang. Voicemail, unknown number. I let it go, but something, maybe the cold weight in my chest, made me check the transcript. Hi, Ms. Harlow. This is Jim Altman from Harford Realty Law. Just calling to confirm the wire transfer went through yesterday. Congrats on the sale. Such a beautiful historic property. Hope the buyers treat it as well as you did. My stomach flipped. Sale? Wire transfer? I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't spoken to a lawyer. I hadn't sold the house. My hand trembled as I replayed the voicemail, twice, 3 times. The tone in his voice was cheery, like I'd been in on it, like I'd handed him a pen with a smile and said, "Take it." I opened my laptop. My fingers refused to type straight. But I managed to pull up my email. Nothing from any realtor, no signed PDF, no e-doc signature. And yet, it was gone. The house was gone. I didn't cry. Not then. I just picked up the phone and called the county registrar. Iban, I didn't even change out of my jeans. My shoes were still kicked off by the front door. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and hollowed-out trust. I drove with both windows down, letting the cool Maryland wind slap some clarity into my face. At the registrar's office, the fluorescent lights buzzed like a low accusation. A clerk, mid-50s, polite but distant, pulled up the file after I slid my ID across the counter. "The deed transfer was processed electronically," she said, tapping keys. "Buyer listed as Rocklight Holdings, LLC. All in order. It cleared 5 days ago." 5 days ago. That was 2 days before he took me to dinner, pulled out the velvet box, and asked me to be his wife with a trembling voice. She turned the screen slightly. "See here? This is the electronic signature attached to the sale." I stared at it. It was his. Not just a digital stamp. He'd used his full legal name, with the same loopy J in his middle initial I'd once teased him about when we signed Christmas cards. I nodded, thanked her numbly, and walked out. The car ride back was silent. No radio, just my own pulse, ticking. By the time I pulled into the driveway, dusk had settled like a film over the neighborhood. Porch lights flicked on down the block. His SUV was in the driveway, parked at an angle like always, as if claiming more than one spot was his birthright. Inside, the house was still. I dropped my bag gently by the kitchen island and paused. From down the hall, a faint murmur. The guest room, his self-declared home office. I padded quietly across the hardwood, the ball of my foot brushing the corner of the hallway rug. The door wasn't fully shut. He was on a call, speakerphone. His voice was lower than usual, clipped. "No, she doesn't suspect anything." "Funds cleared. We're good after the ceremony." My lungs forgot how to breathe. Then another voice, female, chimed in. Light, amused. "I'll book the resort. You just say your 'I do' and vanish." My hand clenched around the doorframe, steadying myself. A heat bloomed behind my eyes, but I blinked it back. The conversation ended with laughter. Not mine. I backed away before the floor creaked. Back in the kitchen, I stood motionless for a long while. I could hear the ticking of the oven clock. My engagement ring, a delicate thing with a pale stone, rested on the counter where I'd left it to clean dishes earlier. It looked small now, almost like a prop. I picked it up. And then I remembered. The day he proposed. We were at a lakeside restaurant. It was a weekday. He'd insisted on the date, said he couldn't wait another moment. His hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring on my finger. Back then I thought it was nerves, or maybe love. Now I saw it differently. There was no receipt, no jeweler's box. I'd tried once to verify the brand engraved inside the band, but found nothing conclusive. He'd brushed it off with a joke. "It's just a ring, not a mortgage." Now I wondered if it was even real. That night, I climbed into bed beside him. He smelled faintly of the cologne I bought him for his birthday. His phone face down on the nightstand. He kissed my shoulder. I let him. I stared at the ceiling. In my mind, I repeated the words I'd heard. "You just say your 'I do' and vanish." And still, he snored softly beside me like the world had never cracked in two. The next day, we went to brunch with his mother at a small place near downtown. She arrived in pastels, oversized sunglasses, and the sort of smug smile that came from always being served first. As she sipped her mimosa, she leaned in slightly. "You know," she said, eyes twinkling over the rim of her glass, "he always gets cold feet when he's almost done." I tilted my head. "Done?" She waved a hand like swatting a fly. "Relationships. He's always been that way. Doesn't mean anything." My mimosa sat untouched. I reached for water instead. She leaned closer. "The last one was smart. Vanished before he could—" You're more hopeful than her. That can be dangerous." I smiled back tightly, as if I hadn't just been doused in acid. On the drive home, I played her words over and over. More hopeful. more dangerous. By the time I pulled into our driveway again, I didn't feel much of anything anymore. Inside, he was on the phone again. I ignored it. Walked straight into the room I grew up in. My old bedroom. It still smelled faintly like cedar and lemon balm. The closet held some forgotten sweaters. My mother's old vanity still stood by the window. In the bottom drawer, beneath old letters, under a stack of linens, I found what I was looking for. A small, silver audio recorder. Dusty, but still working. I stared at it for a moment. The kind of thing my dad used to bring to community meetings, just in case someone changed their story later. I held it in my hand like it might burn me. And then I smiled, barely. If this is how he plays, I murmured aloud to no one, I'll press record next time. Sigh, the cord snaked beneath the desk's molding and disappeared behind the lowest shelf. I got down on my hands and knees, careful not to knock over the half-empty bottle of bourbon he'd left beside the printer. Dust coated the hardwood. My palms stuck to it, but I kept going. Behind a stack of financial books, some unopened, some warped with years of neglect, was a small, cheap plastic splitter. From there, 2 cables ran in opposite directions, one to the desk phone, the other to something tucked behind the row of books near the corner. I pulled the hardcover copy of Winning the Divorce War, ironic now, and that's when I saw it. A small, scratched-up burner phone. No case, no fingerprints. Just sitting there in the dark, as if waiting. I powered it on. No password. The messages were short, blunt, cold. Tulum trip is booked, 2 names, alias, all set. Funds cleared. I'll vanish after the first dance. She's so clueless it's almost cute. And then, a PDF attachment, plain as day. A flight confirmation, 2 outbound seats to Mexico. The departure time was the morning after the wedding, 6:45 a.m. The passenger names weren't ours, but the initials matched, the dates matched. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and went black in my hand. Back at his desk, there was a drawer I'd never opened, not because I couldn't, but because I'd trusted him when he said, "Don't peek, it'll ruin the surprise." Surprise. The key was taped under the desk, right where he always claimed to hide his important stuff. It clicked open with a soft snap. Inside was a white folder, thick, labeled in neat block letters. Exit Plan A, Wedding Backup. Tabs divided the content, budget, photos, venue, and then one that stopped me cold, post-marital transfer of assets. On that tab were typed sheets, legal-looking drafts. Property titles, joint account information, investments. My name had been typed out on every form, and crossed out, thick red pen. He hadn't planned to include me, not after the ceremony, not after I do. I closed the drawer, slower this time. My fingertips tingled, and that's when I picked up the phone. Uncle Jay didn't ask many questions. He never did. As a retired judge, he always knew to let silence do the work first. When I finally spoke, I told him everything. Facts only. No crying, no pauses. I could hear him exhale at the other end. So, he's pulling a financial Houdini. That's one word for it. Come stay with me tonight. Pack light, and no, don't confront him. Yet. He offered his team, civil, not criminal. But he made it clear. We'll be ready if he steps out of line. I scribbled everything down. Dates, names, amounts. I even snapped pictures of the burner screen with my own phone and uploaded them to a secure drive I used for work files. When I turned off the lights and went back upstairs, he was already in bed, snoring lightly, hand draped across my side like nothing had changed. The next morning, I made scrambled eggs and poured coffee like I always did. He walked in barefoot, hair sticking up, looked at me like he couldn't decide if I was a girlfriend or a ghost. Then, casually, too casually, he said, "Hey, you know what might be smart? We should probably sign a prenup, just, for peace of mind, legal clarity and all that." I looked up, smiled like he hadn't just handed me the final nail in his own coffin. "That would make me feel so much safer," I replied gently. His shoulders dropped in relief. "Good. I'll draft something simple today. Just a formality." He grabbed his laptop and moved toward his office. I stirred my coffee. That evening, after dinner, I said I'd be in the guest room folding laundry. Instead, I was backing up the entire contents of that burner phone to the cloud. Every message, every voice memo, every image. I organized it into folders, just like he'd done for the wedding. And then I took the recorder. It was the size of a thumb drive, voice-activated, with long battery life. I'd bought it 2 years ago when I was prepping for a work discrimination case, but never used it. Until now. I tucked it under the passenger seat in his car. I knew she'd be in that car tomorrow. She always was. I'd seen the lipstick smudges on the cup holder, the perfume that lingered, the receipts. Then I went upstairs, pulled out the rehearsal dress hanging behind the door, off-white, elegant, a dress I'd loved until I saw his name scratched off a list of shared plans. I stepped into it, zipped it up, stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Let them see me glowing," when I burned the whole fantasy down. And by the time I slipped the invitation card into my purse, the house had fallen into its usual silence. The kind of silence that feels sticky, like something's watching. But I didn't let it settle on me. Not that night. I zipped my coat, stepped out, and drove through the still blue morning toward the courthouse. Uncle Jay was already standing outside, sipping bad coffee from a travel mug he probably bought the week after his wife died. He gave me a quick nod. No hug, no pity, just what I needed. We didn't talk much on the way in. The papers were already prepped, a motion to freeze the house transfer based on intent to defraud, bolstered by communications from the burner phone and the sudden prenup push. When I handed over the burner, flight confirmation, and the edited prenup, his eyes didn't even flicker. "I've seen men dress treason in tuxedos before," he said, flipping the pages, "but this one went the full costume." He didn't mean to be funny, but it hit me sideways. I exhaled sharply, maybe the closest thing to a laugh I could manage in days. Once inside, he greeted the judge with a familiarity I envied. An old friend from law school, apparently, now grayer, slower, and on her third thermos of tea. She scanned the motion, then glanced at me. "Is he dangerous?" "Not physically," I said, "but he's good at making people disappear, legally." She nodded, signed the emergency injunction, and placed the seal with a deliberate thud. "Your fiancé doesn't know this yet," she said, "but the property's locked. If he tries to move a penny, we'll hear it scream." When we stepped out of the building, the sun had lifted just high enough to throw long shadows across the steps. I stood there for a beat, letting it warm my face. Then I turned, thanked Uncle Jay, and drove to the venue, supposedly to double-check floral arrangements. That was the excuse I gave the planner, and myself. The ballroom was quiet, just a handful of staff prepping for tomorrow. I wandered to the front desk, asked about the table settings, then casually brought up payment. The receptionist frowned and tapped her screen. The deposit was due 3 weeks ago." I played dumb. "Are you sure?" She spun the monitor to face me. "We flagged the file because, well, his card was declined. Twice. He said not to worry, that it was handled through a different account. That account, I later learned, was a wire transfer made the same day he booked a beachfront villa in Tulum under 2 fake names, his and hers. I thanked her, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat for 5 full minutes before I turned the engine. My fingers gripped the wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to earth. Back home, I kept my mask on. I cooked dinner like it was just another day. Grilled salmon, some green beans, a bottle of wine he'd picked out for our special weekend. He walked in humming, briefcase swinging, kissed my cheek with a breezy, "Smells amazing." "Just one more day," I said softly, almost rehearsed. He smiled and slipped into the bathroom. The vent above the kitchen carried everything. "Yeah," he said over the phone, chuckling. "She still has no clue. Wedding's just a formality now. Once the ink dries, we're clear." I stared at the bubbling pot in front of me, spoon hovering mid-air. The salmon had overcooked by the time I moved again. That night, while he snored with his arm thrown across my side like ownership, I slid out from under him. In the hallway, I pulled out the flash drive, connected it to my laptop, and uploaded every file. burner texts, recorded calls, PDFs, to Uncle Jay's paralegal. Then I backed it all up to a second drive, wrapped it in old socks, and buried it at the bottom of my gym bag. Lastly, I scheduled an auto email, one I would cancel only if everything stayed on course. If not, every person invited to the wedding would receive a digital dossier titled A Groom's True Vows. Before crawling back into bed, I pulled the invitation from my purse. Forever starts here, it read in gold lettering. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat, the one I planned to wear to the courthouse. The morning came too early, as they always do when you haven't really slept. I rose, bare feet on cold floor, and stared at my reflection. Let them all dress in white, I whispered, pulling my coat over my shoulders. I'm dressing for war. The venue was quiet when I walked in early, until I saw who was already there, sitting in my seat. She didn't look up right away. Her back was to the door, one heel swinging lazily as she giggled into her phone. It wasn't until I stepped closer that she turned, and when she did, her eyes flickered with something sharp. Not surprise, not shame, amusement. She tapped her phone against her cheek and smirked. Oh, I didn't know the maid of honor had a matching dress. The dress was ivory, backless, deliberately bridal. I tilted my head, keeping my tone light. It's lovely. You headed to another event after this? She bit down a smile. Oh, honey, you'll find out soon enough. Before I left the private lounge, I leaned casually against the arm of the couch, slid a tiny recorder between the cushions while she turned back to her phone. Then, as she hummed some Taylor Swift chorus under her breath, I snapped a photo of the guest logbook on the side table. There it was, in loopy, confident script. Mrs. Blake Allen. My stomach didn't turn. Not anymore. I'd gone through those waves already, the anger, the disbelief. By now, it was all calculation. I stepped out of the lounge and walked the hall slowly, letting the cool air inside the venue reset me. Staff were adjusting chairs, taping cords, testing lights. The florals hadn't arrived yet, which was odd, but I kept moving, circling to the service corridor, where I overheard a conversation near the vendor door. Yeah, we're expecting the license courier by noon, the venue manager was saying to a young assistant. Make sure someone's at the front. Groom insisted on dropping it late. License courier? I moved past the wall toward the admin desk. The door was slightly ajar, and a folder sat on top of the counter. It was marked in red. Marriage documentation. I opened it. The bride's name was mine. First, middle, and last. But the ID number? Not mine. My throat dried. I scanned further. Signature line still blank, but the form was half processed, enough to raise red flags, enough to make something look legal, until it wasn't. Just then, my phone buzzed. Uncle Jay. Sweetheart, he said, his voice tight. He's planning something sleazy. Heard from a clerk at records. He's setting up the paperwork to show he married you. On file. Might try to shift cash into joint holdings. I pressed my hand against the countertop. But it's not legal without your real signature, Uncle Jay added. And he knows that it's a stall tactic, a fake show. You're just the last step. I closed the folder slowly, slid it back where I found it, thanked the universe for timing, and then I got to work. I called Nate, the tech guy my cousin used for all her concerts. He'd done sound setups here before. You still free this afternoon? I asked. Long as it's quick, he replied. What's the favor? Swap the main mic feed at 4 p.m. sharp. I'll bring a drive. You'll know what to do. I hung up and found a quiet alcove backstage. There, I opened my laptop, uploaded my voice memo to a USB drive, and created a backup cloud folder. Then I walked over to the DJ's booth and handed him a small envelope. Play this, I said, when the officiant says my name, not a second earlier. He gave me a puzzled look, but nodded. Got it. Just before slipping outside for air, I handed a sealed manila envelope to a young woman in a blue press badge. Her name was Caitlin. She ran a local wedding blog that had started going viral lately. You want something that'll go national? I asked, straight-faced. She raised a brow. Depends what's in here, I smiled. Check your inbox in an hour. By the time I returned to the front entrance, the staff had started letting early guests into the lobby. I ducked out of sight for a moment and changed in the side bridal suite. I didn't reach for white. Instead, I slipped into a tailored black jumpsuit. High neck, clean lines, no apology. At exactly 4:03, I walked through the side door of the ballroom. Gasps echoed before my heels hit the marble. Someone knocked over a glass. One of the bridesmaids, his cousin I think, froze in mid-sip. And Blake? He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Behind him, the woman from earlier, still in her ivory dress, stumbled half a step back, clutching her phone like a shield. The officiant hesitated. Shall we begin? I gave a small nod. The DJ reached for the button, pressed play. The microphone crackled once. Then my voice rang out, clear and deliberate. This isn't a wedding, it's a crime scene. Let's begin. I walked off stage to silence. The room behind me had collapsed into a low hum of murmurs and glass clinks, but I didn't look back. My heels tapped a steady beat down the corridor, and when I pushed open the back door, the air was different, crisper, still, like it already knew what was about to happen. A uniformed man stepped forward. Broad shoulders, sun-worn face, eyes that had seen their share of family meltdowns in small-town courtrooms. You must be Ms. Lennox, he said, calm but deliberate. I have a court order signed by Judge Hallstrom. Temporary injunction. Nothing's moving today, not property, not accounts, not people. And he handed me the thick envelope. My name was at the top in bold, followed by a line I'd waited too long to see. Petition for asset protection. Emergency relief granted. I nodded once. Thank you for coming in person. He gave me a faint smile. Not every day we serve papers at a wedding, but I figured you'd want the timing. Just right. And with that, he stepped inside. I stayed back for a moment, letting the door close softly behind him. Inside, the reception was still awkwardly clinging to the script. Soft jazz over the speakers, waiters clearing untouched hors d'oeuvres, and guests whispering with that strained, panicked politeness people wear when they realize they've been part of something rotten. Then the sheriff's voice rose, clear and firm. Mr. Allen, he said, not even raising his tone. We need to speak about the attempted transfer of ownership concerning 414 Kingsley Lane. Gasps, sharp and real. Aunt Sylvia put her glass down so hard it cracked. Blake turned slowly, lips twitching. There must be a mistake, he said, forced chuckle hanging in the air. I haven't transferred any. The sheriff cut him off. You did, sir, on paper, while knowingly listing your fiancé's identity and a falsified license number. That falls under forgery, under oath. And just like that, the air got thick. I was near the coat racks when she came stumbling out of the private lounge. The white dress clashed horribly with her uneven tone, and the red creeping up her neck. He said you didn't love him, she hissed. He told me you were using him, that you cheated. I didn't know he sold the house. I looked at her, not with rage, just with the kind of stillness you reserve for things already decided. Oh, you didn't? I said, reaching into my bag. Then you'll enjoy this. I handed her a folded photocopy of the deed transfer. Her name was there, clear as day, not in pen, but typed in, filed, processed. Her hand shook. He put my name on it? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. 10 minutes later, the doors opened again. This time, Uncle Jay stepped in, polished, steady, and carrying his slim leather briefcase like it held secrets, not papers. He walked straight to the front, bypassing the chattering guests, and stopped beside the officiant. I'm counsel to Ms. Lennox, he announced. This event is legally void. The bride is under court protection, and the marriage license on file does not match state records. He handed the clerk a document. The clerk didn't flinch. He scanned it. Then, without a word, fed the paper into the shredder under the podium. The sound it made was satisfying. It could have ended there. But the thing about small towns is people remember. And sometimes they remember too much. Near the dessert table, one of my cousins leaned toward another and muttered, Didn't Blake get expelled in college for something shady? Fraud or something? The whisper grew legs. It sprinted. Within minutes, someone had pulled up a screenshot. Old disciplinary board notes, embezzlement from a student-run fund, expulsion, no degree, no disclosure. I stood still, arms folded, watching the story unravel like old wallpaper. The reporter I'd met earlier didn't speak, just nodded from across the room, phone in hand, typing steadily. Beside me, Uncle Jay leaned in. "You've already won," he murmured. "Don't say a word unless under oath." I didn't. The music had long since stopped. What was left was an odd silence, one with edges. People filed out in clumps, like passengers disembarking a cruise that had quietly run aground. I stayed until the last tray was wheeled away and the staff began dimming lights. Then I stepped toward the exit, heels echoing again, this time slower. At the door, I paused, hand resting on the handle, and looked back once more. "For a wedding with no vows," I said under my breath, "it's incredible how many people ended up exposed." And then I left. The drive back felt longer than it was. Maybe because the adrenaline had worn off, or maybe because some part of me knew what was waiting beyond that front door. I parked by the curb, same spot I used to park when I was 15, sneaking in past curfew and hoping Mom hadn't heard the gravel crunch. I stepped out, shoes crunching softly against the dried grass. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the yard. The shutters on the front window were half open, but the house didn't look any less closed off. I reached the porch steps slowly, key in hand, and unlocked the door to what used to be home. Inside, the air had that heavy, musty stillness, the kind that clings to walls after too much silence. Boxes sat stacked against the walls, some labeled, some left open like half-told stories. Furniture had been pushed awkwardly toward the center, like someone started moving out, or maybe just gave up halfway. But there, in the corner of the entryway wall, beneath the peeling wallpaper, I saw it, the faint pencil marks, my name, my age, my height, year after year. Mom never let us paint over them. I walked toward them, fingers trailing the grooves in the wall. The smallest one read, 8, could finally reach the sink. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out. Upstairs, the bedroom still smelled faintly of lavender. The bed was stripped. The closet doors hung open, exposing a mess of hangers and half-folded sweaters that weren't mine. I dropped my bag on the floor and began pulling boxes out of the closet, sorting what I could. Old notebooks, a shoe missing its pair, a cracked snow globe from Chicago. Then my hand brushed something loose near the back wall. I crouched, pushed gently, and a small panel popped free. Inside, taped to the back of the drywall, was a USB drive. On it, in careful handwriting, was my full name, Salora Lennox. Nothing else. I plugged it into my laptop at the edge of the bed. It whirred, then opened into a folder of audio files. The first file clicked on automatically. Blake's voice came through. Clear, cocky. "Yeah, she's still clueless. Told her it's a refinance. She signed the papers thinking it was for the backyard remodel." Another voice laughed. "That easy, huh? She trusts too much. I'll have that deed clean by end of month. Then it's ours." I sat still, completely still. Each recording was a knife turned slowly. Conversations between Blake and a realtor, dated as far back as 8 months ago. They talked about flipping the house, exploiting tax loopholes, even mocking how sweet I sounded when I asked about the closing date. I didn't cry, not yet. I just closed the file, set the laptop down gently, and stood up. In the hallway, I remembered something Mom used to say when I couldn't sleep. "Sometimes the house will speak to you. You just have to be still enough to hear it." So I followed that quiet. Back to the attic stairs. Tucked beneath a floorboard, one we used to pry open for hide and seek, I found it. A faded blue jewelry box, too small for much. Inside, nestled between a plastic bracelet and an old subway token, was an envelope. My name in my mother's handwriting. The ink had bled slightly at the corners, but I knew that script. "Sweetheart," it read, "if you're reading this, then I'm not there to tell you. Don't let anyone take this house from you. It's more than bricks. It's your roots. This home held you when I couldn't. Don't give it away, not even for love. Especially not for love." Mom. My knees gave way. I slid down against the wall and let the letter rest against my chest. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It wasn't even the house, not really. It was the version of me who almost handed it all away with a grateful smile, who nearly begged for Blake's crumbs, thinking that was what love looked like. In the silence, I whispered, "You almost gave it all away. For what?" The question lingered. Later that evening, I sat in the living room, lights off, watching dust swirl in the fading twilight. That's when my phone buzzed. It was the local reporter, the same woman who'd been outside the courthouse earlier that day. "Hi, Salora. I wanted to say, what you did today, how calm you were, how clear, that matters. People need to see that women don't have to scream to win." I didn't know what to say at first. Then I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I don't want my name in lights," I told her. "Just blur me out. Let the house speak louder than I do." She understood. I think part of me was still holding that letter in my chest even as I spoke. Later that night, after washing the day off my skin, I pulled out an old roll of floor plans from the basement. Ones I drew up in college when I thought I'd become an architect. I unrolled them across the dining table, smoothing out the edges. Then I started sketching again. Not for Blake. Not for any guests he tried to impress. "If I rebuild this place," I whispered, "it won't be for him. It'll be for her. And for me. And for the little girl still marked on that wall by the door." I was folding the last blanket into the linen drawer when my phone buzzed, screen flashing with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in my chest said, "Pick up." I did. A firm voice, measured but cold, introduced himself as part of his legal team. "We're reaching out to inform you that Mr. Dalton has filed suit against you for emotional distress, reputational harm, and breach of contract." I blinked, lips parting in disbelief. "Breach of what contract?" "The wedding agreements, ma'am. He claims monetary loss and reputational injury." I didn't answer right away. My eyes wandered to the letter my mother had written, the one I'd found wedged beneath old floorboards. Her words still echoed in my head. "Don't let anyone take this house from you." I sat down slowly at the kitchen stool, letting the silence linger. Then I laughed, not loud, not bitter, just tired. "Sure," I said softly. "Send it over." The next morning, a certified envelope arrived. I took one look at the embossed letterhead and slid it across the table to Uncle Jay. He was already sipping his third coffee at the breakfast counter. "Let me guess," he said, cracking the seal without needing more than a glance at my face. "He's trying to sue you." "He says I humiliated him, publicly. That I broke our agreement." Jay let out a low whistle. Amazing how fast cowards twist stories. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands steady. "So what now?" Jay didn't flinch. "We don't play checkers here, kiddo. We play chess." We cleared the rest of the table, and he began drafting with the kind of calm precision that only comes from 3 decades in litigation. He laid it all out. Fraud, financial manipulation, attempted property theft, psychological coercion, and reputational sabotage. "That's a lot of syllables," I muttered. Jay smirked. "He started this fire. We're just redirecting the wind." For the next few days, I worked quietly, assembling everything. Screenshots of messages where he pressured me into transferring savings. My old planner, marked with meetings and quotes for the joint house. Audio snippets I'd forwarded from friends who'd overheard his taunts. Receipts, withdrawal slips, even the blank check he'd once left me to fill in if I ever wanted him to take control. By the time we'd finished, the file was over an inch thick. Jay called it the dossier of delusion. I thought that would be the end of it, but that week, my inbox chimed with a new message from an unlisted account. The subject line, "You think you won?" The body was just a link. Curious but cautious, I opened it in incognito mode. It was a blog post, looked like a local gossip column. The headline read, "Local woman suffers nervous breakdown, abandons wedding family." It was laced with passive-aggressive language, implying I'd been institutionalized for paranoia. They'd used my full name. I froze. Then I clicked View Page Info. Whoever made this hadn't even tried to hide their digital trail. The metadata led back to his law firm's IP block. A sloppy last-ditch move. Jay was furious. This isn't just defamation, it's idiocy. We'll add it to the suit. The hearing was set for the following week. I spent the weekend walking the old neighborhood, nodding to neighbors who used to watch me bike down these streets with skinned knees and wild hair. Now I passed them in slacks, hair pulled back, not the same girl, but still her. That Monday, I walked into the courthouse just before noon. The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that pressed down on your skin like wet wool. Jay adjusted his tie beside me as we stood in the corridor. Then I saw him, Dalton, in a navy blazer far too sharp for someone who looked that smug. He had his signature smirk plastered on, but his eyes didn't meet mine for long. "Well, look at you," he said casually, arms crossed. "Still trying to act like you belong downtown." I met his gaze, calm and quiet. "You know what small-town girls do best?" He raised an eyebrow. "We survive. We keep receipts. And we don't forget." Inside the deposition room, the air turned sterile. Fluorescent lights, gray walls, and a small conference table that might as well have been a battlefield. Jay began with the USB. He plugged it in and played the recordings of Dalton speaking to that realtor about the house, about how it'd be hers for now, but once married, it all shifts legally anyway. Next came a voicemail Dalton had left for a friend. It wasn't just immature, it was insulting. He'd laughed about the judge's baby face and said, "We'll make her cry before closing arguments, easy." The opposing lawyer's hand hovered in the air, not writing anymore. His mouth was slightly open. When the audio ended, there was a long pause. Jay closed the folder. "You want to proceed?" The lawyer stood slowly. "No, we're withdrawing the suit." Dalton didn't say anything. He stared at the table like it had betrayed him too. Outside, the world looked different. Brighter, maybe. Or maybe I was just breathing fully again. As I walked down the steps, I saw her, Melissa, the reporter from the local paper. She'd been standing across the street, arms folded, camera bag slung over her shoulder. "Big win," she said, tilting her head. "Want to go on record this time?" I thought about it. Then I smiled. "No. Let the silence speak." I walked past her, down the sidewalk, past the parking meter where I'd once cried after our first breakup. This time, I didn't look back. It was late spring when I stepped through the glass doors of the courthouse again. Exactly 1 year to the week since I'd sat in that same building and felt the foundation of my life split beneath me. But today, there was no tightness in my chest, no panic dragging at my breath, just a steady, quiet step forward. I tucked the manila folder under my arm. Inside, the final paperwork registering my home under a new classification, a transitional support residence, a new name, a new purpose. I paused at the security gate, nodded at the same guard with the kind eyes, and continued down the hallway that used to feel like it was closing in on me. "Room 302, the clerk said cheerfully, glancing up from her desk. "Same bench, huh?" I gave her a small smile. "Same hallway." Not the same woman. The floor still creaked in the same spots. The fluorescent lights still buzzed faintly overhead, but something in the way my heels touched the ground. It echoed differently now, firmer, certain. Outside, as I adjusted my purse on my shoulder and stepped into the light, I nearly collided with someone coming down the front steps. I looked up and froze for a second. It was Judge Hallstrom. He stopped, squinting slightly. Then recognition softened his face. "Well," he said, with a smile that held something between surprise and respect. "Didn't expect to see you back here." I nodded politely. "Just paperwork today. Nothing dramatic." He chuckled. "I still remember that injunction hearing. Most people lose their minds in that room, especially when family's involved. But you just stood, silent, not weak, not angry, just solid." There was a long pause. Then, as if on impulse, he reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This came across my desk last week. I figured, if I ever saw you again, I'd give it to you myself. I took it, confused. There's a community scholarship in your name now, he said simply. Funded by a local group who heard your story. It's for women coming out of betrayal. Of all kinds. I blinked, holding the envelope as if it were glass. He tipped his hat slightly, an old-school habit I'd seen him do in court, and walked past me down the steps. I stood there for a long moment before slipping the envelope into my purse and heading back to my car. The sun had shifted by the time I pulled into the driveway. The house, the same one that once held more secrets than safety, stood tall with fresh paint, stronger windows, a new roof. But the bones still belonged to the girl who once curled up on the hallway floor with a blanket and her doubts. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and wandered through the rooms. The old guest room, once chaotic with boxes and arguments, was now layered in soft linens, a lamp beside a reading chair, and shelves of gently worn books. Everything here invited rest, not defense. A small brass plaque was mounted beside the door. Rest here. Begin again. Last week, I registered the house with a women's transitional housing network. The coordinator told me I'd be the only one on this side of the city offering long-term lodging. I told her, one safe home is better than none. She just nodded and whispered, "You have no idea how needed this is." In the backyard, the grass had grown wild while the construction crews worked. I knelt by the fence line, pulling out a few stubborn weeds, and that's when I saw it. Half buried near the base of the old swing post was a small brick. My heart skipped. I pulled it out gently. It was still there, faded, cracked at one edge, but readable. This house is a promise, not just a place. Mom. She painted it back when I was maybe 10, with that same stubborn brush she used on everything she loved. Loud, messy, absolute. I didn't cry. I walked to the front of the house, set the brick down gently next to the mailbox where flowers now bloomed, not for nostalgia, but because promises, even broken ones, deserve to be seen for what they once tried to be. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sky turned soft with dusk. No music played, no neighbors waved. Just me, a chipped mug of tea, and the breeze through the trees. I spoke quietly into the air. No audience, no camera, no journal. You didn't break me, I said. You just made it easier to see what already held. There was a long pause. Not empty, just wide, like peace. I looked up at the roofline. The house didn't feel like a scar anymore. It felt like skin that had healed thicker, stronger. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes what you lose isn't the worst part. It's what you almost gave away without knowing. That last piece of yourself, buried under trying too hard to stay chosen. That's where the grief lives. But that's also where the healing begins.